we're back live now, and we have a very special speaker. We have Crithica from Canada, and she's the IBM's America's BPO leader, and she's had a long, flourishing career in procurement, and she's going to talk to us about the source-to-pay practices from a shared service perspective, and she's not going to present any slides, but she's going to have a talk with all of us. So yeah, let's clap for her. I know you're remote, but let's have a round of applause for you. So over to you, Crithica, and I will put you on screen.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayank. Good afternoon, team. It's a pleasure to get to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon. I understand from Mayank you've had a very exciting agenda thus far. Let me start by introducing myself. Crithica Parthasarathy. I'm the America's delivery leader for procurement services as part of IBM's consulting practice. That involves responsibility for delivering source-to-pay services for our clients across the United States, Canada, as well as Latin America. And as you can imagine, with a corporation the size of IBM's and in the consulting arena, we have the opportunity to globally invest ourselves in working with centers of excellences around the world, which includes, Asia Pacific, Europe, and most specifically, the Middle Eastern region, as well as our India hubs. I apologize for not being able to be there with you in person today, but it's a pleasure to be able to join you virtually. I'll take a minute to describe my career path to you, and then I'd like to actually walk the team through source-to-pay procurement and what that journey entails, right? So I've had the privilege of being in this profession for a little over 20 years right now. Started right out of my undergraduate studies and was actually able to join the transformation of procurement from a technology perspective. So really, how do you implement an ERP system end-to-end from a source-to-pay standpoint, leverage the functionality within it, and then how do you optimize procurement operations, right? So from Mayank, I understand the afternoon is going to be focused on talking about procure-to-pay, which is really, PR requisition through PO processing and what that entails and how pivotal that is to actually driving the policy and the objectives of a procurement organization. So I spent a few years in that realm trying to understand how process is created, standardized in accordance with policies that are established. And then from there, I actually moved to having an opportunity to set up our centers of excellence from an IBM perspective. So spent a couple of years in India, in China, and then as well in Budapest to replicate and set up centers of excellence that are going to be focused on P2P operations. I then had an opportunity to spend a few years from a strategic sourcing perspective supporting categories like facilities management, IT, professional services, and then was able to spend a few years in our commercial procurement arena. And that's really where we're delivering source-to-pay services for our clients that have outsourced their indirect procurement and often lately their direct procurement to IBM to deliver, or consulting partners similar to us, right? Whether that's Accenture, GEP, et cetera, in the marketplace. Went back into internal procurement for a few years and was able to support globally categories such as IT, corporate professional services, data center, design and construction, facilities, and then came back to our commercial practice in 2016. And it's been a privilege to be a part of this for the last 6 years as we've cultivated more cognitive elements into what we're doing today. So let me take a few minutes to explain to the team what that actually means, right? Traditional procurement, if we go back a few years, or even where most organizations are today, is focused very much on looking at the operational elements, right? So how does order desk operate? How do you receive orders and requests from our clients, from our stakeholders within an organization? How do you process those requests? The speed of processing those requests has a significant focus, right? But I think if we step back for a second, what most organizations miss is how much of that process is actually leaked within different areas, right? So when we talk about compliance or adherence to policy, one of the main things we need to focus on is really understanding what is driving that organization. What do I mean by that? Are we in a mode where we're talking about cost savings? The focus is on cost savings, reducing expenses, driving efficiency from a processing perspective. Or is the organization in a growth mode? And what that means is they actually can't keep up with the demand from a sales side, right? And depending on the industry that a client is based in or the organization you're working with is based in, they're going to pivot to, if they're in a growth mode or an entrepreneurship mode, where they have, various different investments that have been made and we're trying to attain that, or is it in a more low margin area from an industry perspective? You're working on cost savings, cost reduction, right? So as a procurement professional, you're in a very unique position. Outside of sales organizations that exist in most companies, you are the only other function in an organization that is external facing, right? So our sales teams, of course, are working with the market and clients to sell, to generate more revenue. But the procurement organization uniquely is positioned externally within the supplier base, right? So if you can understand which are the goals associated with the organization, as I mentioned, whether it's cost savings or from an entrepreneurship perspective, diversification, or alternatively, the growth is just so immense, right? If we look at today, healthcare, pharmaceutical, even natural resources, we get into areas such as sustainable energy. These are all industries that are growing at an exponential rate, right? And if you're part of procurement organizations or supporting that vision in those organizations, you really need to be able to adapt your strategy to accommodate to that. What does that mean? Let's go back a little bit, right? The beginning of engagement from a procurement perspective is really around strategic sourcing, right? That's generally the trigger point for most of us. So you have a stakeholder within an organization that has a particular need or demand. And the one thing we have to remember is to be versatile, right? So indirect procurement, it really relates to whether it's products or services that an organization is buying to support what it is that they're taking to market. And direct, as I'm sure Mayank and the team have worked over with you or your experience has shared, is actually something that goes into what an organization is either manufacturing or delivering as a service. Either way, you're going to have a significant amount of demand that comes through. You go to market. But part of what we need to understand when we're sourcing strategically, whether it's a means of an RFX, RFP, direct negotiation, is what is the end goal and what is our buying power in the marketplace. And if we can understand both of those elements, you can pivot what your sourcing strategy is to match what that need is, right? And you start from there. You move into the next element of it that that applies. Once you've identified who your supplier is, what your strategy is going to be, the next element of it that's most essential and where a lot of organizations fail, they do excellent at the strategic sourcing piece, leveraging their market interest, but they tend to fail at the execution piece, right? Which when we talk about getting from negotiated savings to realized savings, and we talk about driving compliance in an organization, it's this middle step that matters. That includes a few different things. And if you look at industry today, the term is actually digital middle office, right? Put aside the digital. Digital is automating anything and enabling with technology or process. But the middle office piece, that is everything from establishing your procurement contracts, identifying what terms and conditions should be in there, what are the service level agreements or KPIs, key performance indicators, that should be measured to ensure from a sustainable perspective, you're realizing the benefit of the contracts that you're putting in place, right? The next element of that is, how do you actually set up your payment structure? You don't want to be an organization that is sitting with a significant pool of individuals and people, or that is sitting with a lot of risk associated with issuing a one-off payment, right? And the best way I can describe it is if you look at your own personal household building that occurs, right? So you have a number of bills that come in, you have a number of requirements from, talk about groceries or day-to-day bills for your household. Most of us sit back and see, how can we consolidate these expenses so we have the least amount of charges and we're leveraging our money with one or two vendors. Same approach from a business perspective when it actually gets into order issuance and order management. You want to be able to limit the number of vendors you're dealing with and limit the type of purchases you're making and the mechanism with which you make it, right? That takes us into elements like catalog buying, hands-free buying. Do you have a punch out or a host-in catalog? Do you enable elements such as robotics process automation as part of it? What does that really entail? it means the ordering is happening automatically. Where we're able to do that, we're able to really maximize what we're putting in place from a strategic sourcing perspective, the contracts, the pricing that you have in place. The next element of that, if you really follow through that story, so we've talked about the strategic sourcing piece, we've talked about the order execution piece, it's really coming along payments, right? And that's where a lot of procurement organizations fall off, because we've negotiated a contract, we've established it with the supplier, we've now issued the order, our job is done and we're passing it back. But like anything else in life, if you're not able to follow that storyline back or tie that picture back in, then you're not truly getting to where you're realizing savings or driving transformation or efficiency in the process, right? So we need to pause there for a minute. It's when we talk about compliance, it's getting into elements such as a 3-point check and verification. So does the contract match the purchase order you issued, match the invoice that you've released to the supplier? Where you're able to have that 3-point verification, it's where you can ensure compliance. If you negotiated a 10% savings on your contract, you know that the company and the individuals ordering and requesting those orders are matching to what you were able to negotiate. Thus, your orders are able to go out the door matching to that. And you can actually confirm back to your CFO what the benefit and the value is that your organization is delivering to the marketplace. That's a very powerful statement where you're able to wrap that entire story around and come back with that messaging. That also enables you to understand where there's leakage from a strategy perspective or a sourcing strategy perspective, or policy or sourcing strategy perspective. So when you don't have the spend actually flowing through the designated suppliers and contracts, it's what we call tail spend management or maverick spend management, right? And it allows you to have that focus to then turn it around and establish what needs to be changed, whether it's policy, strategy, or actual compliance within how your ordering mechanism is. All those 3 elements need to be reviewed to drive that, right? And that gives an organization visibility and insight into the actual efficiency of what they're able to put in place, right? From a resource perspective, do we have the right skills? And then from an education, training, and change management perspective, are the right mechanisms being outloaded, right? If I pause there and come back to the story, there's other elements across that source to pay perspective as well. We talk about requirements such as automation in today's day and age, right? And it can be a very, very cumbersome topic to get into and a very intimidating topic to get into for most organizations. But automation doesn't necessarily mean an entire technology shift, right? What we need to really look at is, are there repetitive tasks that take place on an ongoing basis? And if as a team, no matter which element of that source to pay you're engaged in, if you can identify repetitive tasks, those yield themselves to an opportunity for us to drive robotics process automation, right? And as long as you can identify a few streams of repetitive tasks from a day-to-day perspective in how you're engaging, it allows you to leverage that. What does that mean? Most people would sit back and say, okay, if I automate my role or if I find opportunities to do that, it means I'm displacing myself. It absolutely doesn't, and I want to reassure the team of that. If you're able to identify opportunities to automate specific tasks, what that will actually yield to is the ability to then elevate the type of workload that you're delivering within the organization, within the team. It gives you an opportunity then to step back and look at that leakage of spend or leakage from a policy perspective and drive what you need from a strategy standpoint. Because if you're not able to make that bandwidth in time, then we're often, as a procurement organization, very reactive to what the demands of our stakeholders are, right? They have a need that they're driving to us, we're reacting to that need and we're issuing orders. But if we want to elevate ourselves within the organization, we need the opportunity to create that bandwidth, and operational efficiency gives you that opportunity to then drive and influence that strategy, right? And if I step back today, there's a couple of key areas we need to focus on as procurement organizations. Sustainability is one of them. Very broad topic, one that everybody touches on in today's day and age, and it really breaks out into environmental and social responsibility, right? From an environmental perspective, are you selecting the right suppliers that are going to support your mission and vision as an organization when it comes to environmental sustainability? And are the policies that those suppliers driving elements that are point in time, or are they truly integrated into how that organization is delivering that product or service today? The other thing that's critical and important there is, how are you measuring that from a lifetime performance perspective with that supplier, right? So, most organizations, if we go back a few years ago, will talk about elements of sustainability attributed to, we changed all the lights in our facility and we're using very efficient lights. We are measuring our carbon footprint, right? But today, in 2022, and as we look beyond, it is really important to, how are they on an ongoing basis managing their carbon footprint, right? And what that means is, how is the measurement happening? How are the credits tracked? How is it upstream and downstream documented? And then how is that rolling back into what the suppliers are providing for you? As procurement experts, you're in a very, very unique position to be able to influence such a integral topic in today's society, right? No matter which industry you touch, sustainability has become, front and foremost of that platform. And influencing where each dollar of money an organization invests goes and how that will drive a sustainable world is a very unique position and a privileged position, in my opinion, right? So I think as procurement professionals, when you make those decisions as who you're awarding dollars to, if you can embed in that part of your strategy sustainability, it is pivotal. And then it also needs to become part of the story when you talk about vendor management or supplier management. So on an ongoing basis over that 2, 3, 5-year term, how are you measuring that? No different than you would measure their performance against savings, against SLAs or KPIs, so service level agreements or key performance indicators, whatever it is that you're measuring for that particular contract, sustainability needs to be a key element of it as well. And we need to learn what those measures actually are. ESG being one of them, right? So when we talk about environmental social governance, there's very specific things governments are measuring to be able to demonstrate that. And if you can influence that, then when it comes at an organizational perspective, you're also driving how much they become attractive to clients that are looking to buy from your organization as well, when they measure this element as part of what they're awarding to. And I'll touch on one more topic and then open for Q&A, right? And this is around supply chain. Supply chains, of course, existed for hundreds of years, well beyond when we actually started to scope procurement specifically. But more and more as we get into 2022 and beyond, given the crisis we're coming out of with the pandemic, the ability to drive a procurement strategy that influences upstream. By upstream, I mean areas of supply chain like inventory management, order processing, order acknowledgement with suppliers, right? The ability to determine what exactly are the right inventory volumes that you need to keep your operation lean, but ensure you have the right lead times to be able to deliver to dynamically changing client requirements. And then the downstream aspect, which is really order acknowledgement. Did you receive the requirements in time? Your warranty around those requirements, right? Especially in the area of direct procurement and elements such as logistics and fleet. This is becoming more and more important as we come out of the pandemic. There's a surge in demand from organizations across industry, but a significant inability for manufacturing partners to be able to meet that surge in demand, right? Especially in growth regions when we look at, Middle East and Africa, in certain areas in Europe and Latin America, we're seeing a significant drive in this because of the fact that most organizations significantly tapered back on their buying needs and their commitments to suppliers when the pandemic was initially experienced, and now we're trying to recover from that. And of course, every organization is driving to meet utmost revenue, right? So how can you influence that? As a procurement professional, you influence it by making sure that you're measuring your suppliers to the right requirements, by you're making yourself attractive, right? So having money in your wallet and going out to the market is one thing when every vendor in the market wants the dollar in your wallet. But today we're in an era where there's multiple people with dollars in their wallet and there's only a subset of vendors. So how do you make your organization attractive to those vendors or suppliers? That's going to be a key thing that differentiates the future of procurement, right? And that's going to be essential based on your ability to sell your organization and the sustained growth of it in the marketplace. So I'll pause there, Mayank and team, and happy to open it up for questions or share more in a specific area.
One second, Crithicas, if you can hear me.
I hear you perfectly, no problem.
Okay, great. So, firstly, thanks a lot for the session and for the perspective. And I think it was very well synced with. I was literally talking about procurement, buying before this, and P2P, and then you jumped in into this. So yeah, please, guys, feel free to come and ask your questions, and or to grab a mic. I think Crithica can hear you. We'll do a brief Q&A, and then we'll get on to the next session. Feel free to ask questions, guys. Sir. Yes, please feel free.
General, even not within the
Use the mic. Yes.
even not within the subject she just said. Let's say I want to ask about the dynamic discount. It's okay. It's general question. It's any harm if I ask about something not into the subject? She just talk about it.
You can ask the question. I think she can anyway answer.
Okay, you know about the dynamic discount, okay? When we reach to analyze the payment or how much to spend, is there is any possibility to make discount after issuing the LPO? Let's say the amount of the invoice 10,000 and the amount of the LPO 10,000, and for some reason in the delivery time or in the quantity there is in procurement law, it's possible that we can make discount after issuing the LPO? Allowed?
Absolutely. So
And just for your information, I am salesperson.
no problem. So thank you very much. So dynamic discounting is a very, very interesting topic, right? And so, overall, broadly, my answer would be yes, absolutely. Even after a PO is issued, depending on what factors are driving it. So if, say, delivery date is delayed, right? Or the volume is not being able to be delivered by the customer. So we order 100 units as an example, and 75 units are delivered and 25 units are late to be delivered. Alternatively, there's warranty issues, right? Or other issues associated with quality or delivery. Then we can absolutely, you have the opportunity to go back. Now, in most cases, I would recommend when you're putting contracts in place or statements of work in place with the supplier, ensure that you have levers in there that allow you to shift and change for dynamic discounting based on these factors. But even if you do not have that contract or statement of work up front, the market is a very, very open market right now, right? And I think negotiation comes down to equity and fairness. And if you're able to document what the challenges are from a client perspective, most suppliers you will find will be adaptive to it. So yes, it can be done after a purchase order is issued. But once again, I go back to my comment, right? To ensure efficiency, and when you're talking about resources, the time that they spend to negotiate and put these things in place, I would highly recommend that you have levers in there in advance, right? That allow you to measure the quality of what a supplier is providing so that the discounting happens automatically. And you can ingrain it into your process, right? And it can be an element of that. So if an invoice comes in and only partial order was provided, X% discount ends up being applicable to it. Of course, when you talk about upfront dynamic discounting, one of the main things is from a scope of work perspective, right? To be able to establish what is going to drive that. You don't want it to be, historically, it's been very singular vision, right? And we've measured based on, really volume has been the measure for dynamic discounting in the past. But today, you really have to look at it from a multifaceted perspective. What else is of value to the organization, whether it's speed, quality, if you look at certain categories in the services area, right, it can be quality of the resource delivering the service, and then actual completion of the service and the satisfactory level of it can also be involved in establishing a percentage off of whatever list price you've agreed to. So I'll pause there, and please let me know if I answered it or if you have a specific follow-on.
Yes, thank you very much, really.
My pleasure.
And my colleague, he want to ask question.
What I hear in the lecture that you advise to apply something as 80-20 rule on the vendor list. So how could that add value, or why do you recommend to use this methodology particularly?
I apologize. Mayank, I don't know if you're in the room, but the question didn't come across clear. Could you repeat it for me, please?
Yes, of course. What I heard during your lecture that you advise to apply something as 80-20 rule, where we have to eliminate the small suppliers, or focus on the most 20 who are.
Let me just repeat so I make sure I'm answering it correctly, right? We're talking about the traditional 80-20 rule to make sure that we're maintaining supplier leverage. Is that correct?
Yeah. So how that could add value, or why do we have to follow this methodology?
So this is a bit controversial, right? I would say this is my more personal view versus a corporate view. I think in today's day and age, the 80-20 rule has gone away, right? And what I mean by that is, historically, you wanted to make sure if you were spending, say, as an organization, $1 million, that 800,000 of those went to your core vendors, and you keep driving it to that core vendor base to make sure you maximize your savings. What we're finding today is that what we're buying is constantly changing as an organization, right? Because you're deciding make versus buy. You're entering into new markets and new areas as an organization. So what you're buying is changing. You're not buying the same thing every day, every month, and every year. And therefore that 80-20 rule is really changing, right? And it's no longer as relevant as it used to be. Now, it's still important. You don't want to grow, if you have $1 million, you don't want to go from spending it with 500 suppliers to spending it with 1,500 suppliers, because the less you spend with one particular supplier, the less leverage you have. But in the same token, I think it's really important for us as procurement professionals to think about what we're buying, because a startup or a venture capital might have a better ability to deliver what we're looking for at a better price than going traditionally to the large vendors and spending it with them in order to keep our supplier or vendor base small, right? One of the other things we really need to look at is more and more integrators have advanced themselves, right? So, does it make sense to go to an integrator that can provide the end-to-end service? So give you the product and the warranty and the installation, or on the service side, provide you the service and the warranty and the follow-on service as you adapt to it, right? And you have to balance yourself. So, incorporating integrators into your vendor base or consolidators will let you keep your vendor base smaller, but it still allows you from a tier 2 perspective to tap into the market of new opportunities, right? New vendors and new opportunities, because if you want to stay innovative as an organization, you have to show that you're partnering with those new areas. Otherwise you become, call it antiquated very quickly. So I hope that answered your question, or let me know if you have a follow-on, please.
Yes, I did. Thank you for your contribution.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from anyone? Otherwise, we'll let Crithica go. Okay, thanks a ton, Crithica, and especially from where you're doing the session. There's a big round of applause.
Thank you, team. All the best with the rest of your session. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.